Welcome to the very first class of Health Economics. The voice that you hear behind the screen is Lindsay Woodworth. I'm the instructor for the course. As I've mentioned to you previously, the format of this class is going to be a little bit different, perhaps from other online classes that you're taking, and that it's going to have a little bit more of a podcast type flavor to it. And hopefully this will just simplify some things so that you can retain the information a little bit more. If you are listening to this, then you have reached Blackboard and you have access to the video. So just as a reminder of the materials that you're going to need today and in future classes to engage the material, make sure you have your class notes packet with you. What I've effectively done in the packet is I have taken the notes for you that you would have taken if you were in a physical classroom, but I've just left blanks. So as you're listening along, you can fill in the blanks, and that will hopefully fill in all the gaps that you need throughout the semester. Today we're going to go through Chapter 1. Chapter 1 is very short and sweet. It's basically a motivation for why this class, I'm going to argue, is important, and it will give you a taste of what we're going to be getting into for the rest of the semester so you can decide if you like it. The title of Chapter 1 is Why Health Economics, and with that I'm just going to jump right in. The first argument that I'm going to try to convince you of in terms of why we should care about this particular field is that if you are living in the United States or if you pay taxes, then health economics is something that you should care about because the U.S. spends a lot of money on healthcare. And to give you a visualization of what a lot of money practically means, if you think of all of the spending in the U.S. economy as a pie, we call this GDP, then if you take a slice out of that pie, that accounts for about 18% of the pie. That's the amount of total spending in the United States that is going towards healthcare. And the raw dollar amount that we're spending every year is about $3.6 trillion. So in America, we're just spending gobs and gobs of money on healthcare. So for that reason alone, it's worthwhile to take a step back and just make sure we understand these markets so that we can kind of give ourselves the reassurance that we're not wasting a whole bunch of money. On the screen right now is a figure, and the figure shows different countries over time, and the vertical axis is the percent of the country's GDP that is spent on healthcare. So the vertical axis is effectively the same thing as the fatness of the pie slice that corresponds to the spending on healthcare. And there are two things I want to highlight in this figure. One is that across nearly every country, or at least all the countries that are shown in the figure, the slopes of the lines are positive. So what this is telling us is that over time, across the world, countries are not just spending more on healthcare, but they're spending more relative to what they're spending on other goods. So the fatness of their pie slices is increasing. The pie slices are getting fatter over time, and this is a worldwide phenomenon. But there's a clear outlier, and the outlier is the United States. So not only does the United States have a line that is much higher than the rest of the world, which suggests that at baseline, our pie slice is super fat relative to other countries, the steepness of the U.S. line is greater. So we start out with a fatter pie slice for healthcare spending, and our pie slice is getting fatter at a quicker rate than the sizes of other countries' pie slices are increasing. The reason this should be alarming to you if you have a job and pay taxes is because the United States, about half of the healthcare spending that happens is done by the federal government, and the federal government gets their money through taxation. And so the more money is spent on healthcare, the more money is coming out of your pockets effectively. So for that reason also, health economics is an important thing to study. Okay, reason number 2 of why health economics is important is because healthcare markets are just fundamentally different than other markets in economics. An interesting thought experiment is to think about why we have particular subfields within econ. So when you're enrolling every semester, you have a list of electives that you can choose between. And in addition to just generic micro and macro, we have specialties like industrial organization and public economics. And the reason we have those specialties is because within those subfields of economics, we have to use different tools than the tools that are generally used in just micro and macro. So the reason I highlight this is because health econ is kind of a new field. up until somewhat recently, economists just nested healthcare markets underneath the umbrella of microeconomics, and we use the typical models that are used in micro to predict what would happen in healthcare markets. And so we didn't have a health econ class because we didn't think that we need to think about healthcare in a way that's any different than what we think about things like widgets. This changed in 1963 when an economist named Kenneth Arrow wrote this landmark paper that argued to the profession that we really need to split apart health econ and treat it as something different because it just doesn't follow the patterns of traditional microeconomics. And the first argument that he made, and it's even shown on the first page of the article he published, is that the good in health economics is unusual. So the first sentence of the second paragraph in his article says, "It should be noted that the subject is the medical care industry, not health." This is an important thing to pause and just highlight in your brain. When we're thinking about markets and healthcare, the good that's being exchanged is not health. Health is this invisible thing that we can't touch. We can't formally buy and sell it. Yet it's always there and it's always influencing everything. So the things that we actually exchange in the marketplace, the actual tangible goods like ventilators and Band-Aids and casts, all of those things have demands that are derived from health, and health is invisible and it's influencing everything. This creates some problems in terms of modeling because this invisible thing that's influencing our demand for products is something that has a lot of uncertainty wrapped around it. And it has uncertainty in two dimensions. So the first dimension is I just don't know what my health is going to be tomorrow. So whether or not I need to be put on a ventilator is going to depend on what my health condition is, but I can't tell you tomorrow whether I want the ventilator because I can't tell you tomorrow what my health condition is going to be. The second dimension of uncertainty that gets wrapped up into this is uncertainty regarding the efficacy of treatment. So not only do I know whether I will potentially want a particular product because I don't know my health, I also don't know if I purchase a particular product whether it will work in making me better. So Arrow also makes this argument in the very first paragraph of his article, and so I'm going to give you storytelling part 2. So I'm going to start reading in the second sentence of the article. Arrow says, "It is contended here, on the basis of comparison of obvious characteristics of the medical care industry with the norms of welfare economics, that the special economic problems of medical care can be explained as adaptations to the existence of uncertainty in the incidence of disease and in the efficacy of treatment." So to dumb it down a little bit, I just want you to focus on the last sentence and the uncertainty in the incidence of disease. In other words, we don't know whether a person's going to get sick. We don't know whether this invisible thing is going to kind of manifest or not. Therefore, we don't know our demand for tangible products. And then the other level of uncertainty is with respect to the efficacy of treatment. So efficacy is just a fancy way of saying we don't know whether treatment is going to work. There is an entire discipline that deals with uncertainty and probabilities. And if you're a risk management person at Darla Moore, you're probably very familiar with this. And so because of all this uncertainty in healthcare, insurance markets are very prevalent in this field. However, when it comes to modeling insurance markets, that's also quite difficult. And the main reason it's difficult to model insurance markets is because there's an enormous amount of asymmetric information. Asymmetric information simply means that either side of the market has a different amount of information. So in the case of health insurance, the information that we're talking about is the understanding of a person's probability of getting getting sick or staying healthy. So again, we have this health that's invisible and it's uncertain, but every person is probably going to have a probability of getting sick. So say, for instance, that I have a 20% probability of getting sick. And then whether I get sick or not is going to influence my demand for a product. But the underlying probability of getting sick is 20%. In the insurance market, we have people like me who would like to buy insurance. We have insurance agents who are selling insurance. And my understanding of my probability of getting sick is a little bit firmer than my insurance agent's understanding of my probability of getting sick. So I may know pretty well, because I know how many times a week I go to the gym and how many vegetables I eat, that my probability of getting sick is 20%. The insurance agent, on the other hand, he doesn't know what the probability is. He may have a guess that it's maybe between 10 and 30%, but his estimation of the very probability is a lot fuzzier than it is on my end. And the reason this is problematic is because in the insurance market, the person who has the additional information about their probability of getting sick, they actually have every incentive in the world to misrepresent the information that they have. So as we'll talk about in future chapters, this creates a whole bunch of problems in terms of creating insurance markets that actually survive. All right, the last kind of tidbit that was highlighted on the first page of Arrow's paper is that one additional way that healthcare markets are kind of distinct from markets for widgets, for example, is that there are just an enormous number of externalities. So in a market for widgets, if I purchase a widget that has no influence whatsoever on your decision to purchase a widget, everyone is just kind of siloed in their thinking. Health is unique in that health is contagious. So we have this invisible thing that influences whether or not we want products, and this invisible thing has a lot of uncertainty wrapped around it. And moreover, this invisible thing is contagious. So if I have a 20% chance of getting sick, and I actually do get sick, then that's going to increase the probability that my neighbor gets sick. And so my neighbor's invisible thing is going to experience a change in its probability of happening. So for all of these reasons, Kenneth Arrow said, hey, economists, stop a minute. We can't just treat health markets like we treat other markets. We really need to split it apart and have a separate field and call it health economics. And so that's what we have today. Okay, so far I've given you two reasons for why we should care about health economics. One is that the U.S. spends a lot of money on healthcare. Number two is that healthcare markets are just fundamentally different than other markets, so we need to have different tools to model them. The last reason for why we should care about health economics is a very straightforward reason that probably needs very little justification. But there's a lot of gray area in healthcare policy debates. So if you pay any attention to the news, policymakers have an array of opinions about what healthcare policies should be implemented. And one of the reasons we can have such varied opinions is because a lot of policymakers and a lot of economists, to be honest, don't have a really firm understanding of what different policies would do if they were implemented. So the goal of this discipline of health economics is to embrace all the weird features of healthcare markets and incorporate them into our models so that our models are very predictive of what would actually happen if certain things were passed legislatively. And if we have very firm predictions, then the hope would be that policymakers would have a better understanding of what the repercussions of particular policies would be, so that hopefully we would have a little bit more consensus in terms of what would be a good idea to do in terms of health policy in the United States and also in other countries. So that's the end of my spiel for the day. Every day you're going to get a spiel from me, and once the spiel is over, don't run away. We're going to pause for 10 minutes and have a question period so that you can submit your questions, and then I can provide answers in live time and everyone can see the answers at the same time. After the 10 minutes of questions, we're going to resume, and every day there's going to be a short exercise for you to do for the day. And the exercise is going to serve as your participation score. So I will give you something to do, and by the end of class time, you need to submit your response to whatever I ask you to do. And as long as you get it in by the end of class time, it will count for 100% of your participation score for the day. Again, it doesn't necessarily have to be correct. I just need to know that you're tuning in and participating. So with that, we're going to break for 10 minutes, and I will see you after that. All right, welcome back to the exercise portion of the class. In a traditional classroom on the first day, I tell you a little bit about myself so that you can know who your professor is. So I thought I would do that again today just so you know who the voice behind the slides is. And then the exercise that I'm going to ask you to complete is for you to just give me a little bit of information about yourself so that I can know who's in the class. And you can just submit your responses by the end of the class hour. And as long as I get it by the end of the class time, you'll get a participation grade for the day. So background information on me. As you know, my name is Lindsay Woodworth. I am originally from the Midwest. I grew up in Kansas, and I went to undergrad at Wichita State University and studied economics. When I was getting close to graduating, I had no idea what I wanted to do at all. I had a professor who saw that I had taken a lot of math classes, and so they suggested that I think about getting a PhD in economics. And they said, you should really just skip a master's degree and go straight towards a PhD, because a lesser known fact of graduate education is that you do not pay to get a PhD. If you get accepted to a PhD program, typically they pay for your schooling, which is not the case for master's programs. So my professor said, why don't you just apply to a PhD program? They'll pay for your schooling. In the event you fail out, usually they'll give you a master's degree as kind of a consolation prize. So since I didn't have other plans, I started a PhD in economics at the University of Florida. And at the time, I had zero interest in health econ. In fact, I really did not like health econ. But the medical center at the University of Florida needed a research assistant. And the nice thing about econ students is we give you a lot of quantitative skills that other students can't offer. And so the medical center asked specifically for an economics student to go over there and work as a research assistant for them. And so I was the person who got sent over there. And throughout the course of working over at the medical center at the University of Florida, I kind of developed an interest in what was going on in emergency rooms across the country. Right now, wait times in emergency rooms are incredibly long, and what's interesting about ERs is that anytime there's some kind of wrinkle in the healthcare system in general, usually the first place that it becomes evident that there's a wrinkle somewhere is in the emergency room. So typically wait times will either get longer or the characteristics of the patients will change. And so ERs just became a very fascinating place for me. And so what I started to do was take my training from econ, and in particular kind of the econometric skills that I had, and applying that to the emergency room setting to answer questions that ER doctors would be interested in. And so right now, most of the research that I do is related to emergency rooms, and it uses econometric tools just from traditional econ to help them answer some of their questions. After I graduated from University of Florida, I started a postdoc at University of California at Davis, and this was kind of an interesting path that not very many econ students take, so I'll kind of explain it to you in case you have any interest in something similar. So the federal government, they were and they are very interested in interdisciplinary research. So they gave the University of California, Davis a grant to bring in scholars who had interests in different disciplines, and they would pay these people as postdocs to do research across fields. And so this was the program that I participated in. So I spent half of my time in the econ department at UC Davis. I spent half of my time in the medical center at UC Davis. And so I'd work with ER doctors. After their shifts, I'd swing by their offices and talk to them and find out what was going on in the ER. And then I'd also spend time in the econ department, and I would work with just straight up economists. And so this is a really kind of useful experience to, again, take exactly what was going on within the hospital and within ERs, and then study that using the tools of economics. So again, the pattern kind of continued. I'm still doing research in health econ with a particular focus on emergency rooms. And so it's a cool area to study. So if you have any interest in that throughout the semester, feel free to reach out, and I'm glad to talk more. Okay, so that's background on me. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is to submit answers to the 5 questions that are on the screen. So first of all, tell me your name. Second, tell me what academic year you are, so whether you're a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, or a master's student. Related to that, question number 3 is, I would like you to tell me whether or not you're taking this particular course for master's credit. If you are, there's an additional project that you'll have to complete per the university's requirements. So just let me know whether or not you're taking this class for master's credit. Number 4, tell me your hometown. And the 5th question is just yes or no whether or not you have completed Econ 321. Econ 321 is intermediate microeconomics. It is not a prereq for this class, but it is kind of useful to have some of that information. So if a good chunk of the class has not taken it yet, I'll try to get everybody up to speed a little bit more. So again, just make sure you submit your answers to those questions by the end of the class time. And if you do so, you'll get a participation grade for the day. I will talk to you next class.